very interesting question, this idea that reconnective healing contributed significantly to the world moving into the fifth dimension or fifth dimension conversation. And I think reconnective healing established an awareness of fifth dimension, or we'll say multidimensional, which we prefer, consciousness much earlier than even 2012, but the mindset for a collective conversation in 2012, I think the door opened in a significant way to the whole planet. It was a conversation, right?
It really was. It was a whole shift. First of all, people had to begin to grasp being nonlinear. And that was part of the reason, that we went from thinking of it as fifth dimensional into understanding that it was multidimensional, because it didn't stop at fifth. It continued on, and it wasn't linear, so it couldn't be sequentially numbered beyond 4. It was tricky enough discovering that there was a fourth dimension being time, because we understood the first 3 dimensions of height, width, and depth, and we were looking for the fourth dimension to look something like this, and it didn't. It looked instead like time, which, what does time look like to begin with anyway? So when you asked earlier, has reconnective healing influenced this shift? I think it has in many ways, by bringing about a recognition that we are more than we appear on the surface, and that our awareness takes us beyond what we are cognizantly thinking, what we are consciously aware of. Yet it's a greater awareness, what Jillian and I refer to as an awareness, just like consciousness doesn't mean that our mind is picking up on every aspect of that consciousness.
Right. And I think reconnective healing, in the very essence of what we experience as we receive the energy, light, and information, or what science refers to as the spectrum of energy, light, and information, and what occurs in that experience, that very multidimensional experience, is that we move beyond the conscious and even unconscious awareness or mind state, or mind comprehension, if you will. And that in and of itself begins to reveal what we'll call the invisible being made visible. And the fifth dimension or multidimensional expression for reconnective healing is very much the opportunity, or it presents the opportunity for us to witness in this completely non-judgmental, I'm going to say even void of the feeling experience, right?
Right.
Beyond the feeling and thought paradigm.
So when you ask what makes it so difficult to experience multidimensional realities beyond the 4-dimensional existence that we're used to, it's not that it's difficult to experience it. Sometimes there's just this one little fine point that allows us to then recognize the experience of it. There's a letting go, and suddenly there just becomes a state we exist in where we realize that we are more aware of certain things than we have been before. Time becomes sort of a float, almost like I don't want to call it a dance, but it's a floating experience, and there's a stillness that allows us to recognize ourselves in a different manner.
I'm going to even suggest that maybe part of the understanding being clear is to remove the word experience. And I know that that's such a controversial concept, but it may be where we get a little tripped up in reconnective healing because we're seeking an experience that we understand as being something sensorial, something we can taste, touch, hear, see. And with the reconnective healing frequencies, yes, we have that available. It's very kinesthetic in one sense and very tangible in one sense, but it actually moves beyond the sensory experience or experience itself.
It's an entrance point.
An access point.
An access point. Great. Again, we have to find words in a linear language to explain the non-linear. But what happens is, and for so long, from the very beginning when reconnective healing came about, people were asking, how do you do it? Can you teach it? And we focused so much on the how that we weren't really entirely, giving due attention to the what or the why. So the how began with feeling, with sensation in our hands if we were a facilitator, for example, but also in the awareness and the sensation for the person receiving the frequencies, whether it's us doing self-healing or working with others. But we then witnessed visibly involuntary movements of the body that the person could feel, we could see, we could experience ourselves, and we became very attuned to what are these registers? Can we bring them about? Can we enhance them? What are we feeling? What are we experiencing? And we stopped there. We stopped at the connection because we were focused on the what, instead of exploring into the access that it gave us. I'm sorry, because we were focused on the how, and the how-to, not the what. Instead of exploring the access that it gave us. And funnily enough, the access that it gives us can take us to a place where we're no longer feeling or seeing or experiencing in that conscious level. And yet that introduction through feeling can be important because it can be a springboard. It's
Absolutely.
like climbing up a diving board. To dive, you have to be on the board to dive off of the board, yet the off of the board is really where we're headed.
Yeah. I do think we're really aware of the fact that the how-to experience for a couple of decades, the how to do something, the how to do this as a healing approach, certainly took a large focus for the reconnection and for reconnective healing.
And for healing in general.
Yes.
Even our book publisher was saying, come out with another book and call it 7 steps to this and 12 steps to that. And somewhere, Jillian and I knew from these early conversations that it came in the releasing of the steps.
Of the how-to.
And of the sequentials.
So that aspect of the multidimensional, or how it contributes to moving into this multidimensional access, I think is very much at the heart of reconnective healing and the relationship with the intelligence, the conduit, these frequencies, this universal energy force that we call reconnective healing, or that we call the reconnection. So at this time, 2012, 8 years later, I should also mention 2012 was the collision.
Well, we met. That's true.
So it was, in a way, a new access point, I'm going to say. And in this moment, the how-to is really not where the most important aspect or the most dynamic aspect of reconnective healing really lies. It's much more so in the why, the relationship.
The why, the purpose for.
The what?
Yeah, it's all a bigger part of the question. It's almost like the how-to becomes the manual steps in a sense. And yet what we know with reconnective healing is there are no steps. So we had to teach the step list and then realizing that the way for us to grasp being beyond it was to look at the whys and the hows. So for example, when you asked before, how can we experience being outside of the 4D reality, outside of time and space, does reconnective healing bring us there, and is it a quantum process?
I think with the age of meditation being so very accessible, I believe that much of the world meditates at this point. And if not,
they meditate about meditating.
Yes, between yoga. Between yoga and meditation, we're certainly living a planetary acceptance and awareness that there is access in this 4-dimensional height, width, depth, and time transformation, or to really experience. And again, I think the key word here is the experience. It is difficult to move into what we'll call other realities beyond 4D until we've touched the depth of transcending, I'm going to say, height, width, depth, and time, but in a conscious and on a conscious level. At that moment, that's when we seek more. And the more is perhaps the next aspect of how do we experience 4D outside of space and time. Right now, space and time is something we can learn to transcend through the thinking mind. Really, we can observe mind to matter. We have the capacity to use aspects of our thoughts and proper, I'm going to say, emotional training to transcend just the thinking mind, and portals in that way open for us to see and visit and view. But that isn't really at the heart where reconnective healing is focused.
No, and the interesting thing about it is, because it's existing in so many levels at once and beyond levels, and we look at it and take it beyond multidimensional into a scalar continuous expansion, it becomes a little difficult to explain, because certain things sound at first like contradiction until you realize that they're actually explanation and reinforcement for a greater understanding. So it's like we can explore getting beyond it through the mind, yet getting beyond it also requires getting beyond the mind, which sounds like a contradiction in itself, because once we move beyond the mind's awareness of it, which is how we step into it, we move into recognizing the feeling, the sensation, the observation, suddenly we end up somewhere where that awareness no longer is.
Exactly.
And it's a funny thing, because, you know, when you asked earlier, is reconnective healing a quantum process? It's a funny thing, because when we ask whether it's a quantum process, we have the answer is yes, but we have a certain concept of quantum in mind. Most people, when we ask about it, thanks to Keanu Reeves and Hollywood, we think a quantum process is suddenly when time stops and we're slowly moving through space at one rate and everyone else is watching it something else. But really, it doesn't feel like quantum to us, because it doesn't change. It won't feel like quantum to you necessarily until you then look back and see that you'd gone from here to here without maybe even noticing the trip.
I mean, I think teleportation, in a sense, in a way, is something many people are starting to consciously capture. They can have what we call a blip in space-time, and actually be in awareness that they've been in parallel times, maybe simultaneously, and even in a very kind of waking, walking, aware.
Or driving.
Or driving.
Like we've had.
We've had a few
Yeah,
of
we
those.
have.
So this is I think is a important precipice, the quantum reality or the quantum mechanics of how we exist in our everyday lives. The interesting part about the reconnective healing intelligence is that it just instantaneously creates the access point and you're there. So there isn't a buildup. You can take advantage of all the nuance along the way. I mean, you can really sit in the reconnective healing feeling state and play with the highly tangible and profound feeling that the interaction with the frequencies brings about. And then once you're ready to sort of move on, then, as Eric was pointing out, the scalar, the next simultaneous, not another location, but the next level of awareness is simply just waiting for you to receive. And I think the key word here is receive.
Right.
And
it's definitely receive. And the funny thing too is I want to focus on this word ready, because we have so much attachment to ready. And it starts off when you're a kid and you're going to run a race and everyone gets ready, on your mark, set, go, and everyone's like ready and we're tense. In actuality, at least at this level, a readiness is when we let go of the desire and the quest to become ready. It's that quantum transformation that we didn't notice in process.
Right.
So as we begin the introduction, as I would begin the introduction way back of teaching reconnective healing and saying, feel the sensation, play with it, watch the registers, watch the involuntary movements, that was us, in a sense, getting ready. But you see, what couldn't be taught was what comes beyond that, because that is only accessed in the total release of the attachment, the intention, the attempt to get ready to do something. It is simply another level of awareness, as we spoke about, in the very beginning of this interview, one that we are not cognizantly or consciously, these are the best words I can come up with, aware of through the mind, is one that comes with a release
of the formula,
of the thinking mind and the formula. Yes.
And I think that that's an important place for us to kind of, let's just say, digest the idea. We leave the formula. We are no longer focused in any way on how the mindset takes us to a new access point, because it isn't the mindset that takes us to the new access point. It is no longer reliant on any aspect of the mind's ability to capture, record, respond. It is greater than what the mind and or the brain even is requiring one to be present with. It's beyond imagination. And I think that's as quantum as we probably are going to get.
So we'll release being formula babies as of this moment. And why don't we step into more of your questions for us in part 2 of this interview? Is that good?
Thanks.
Thanks so much.